Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. It is great to see everybody for our second junior parent night. I want to start by wishing everybody a very, very happy new year. I hope that your year is off to a healthy and happy start to you and your families. My name is Ross Mancuda. I'm the Director of College Counseling and Academic Planning at Milken. I am really excited to be joined tonight by my colleagues who we will introduce in a moment. I usually start with a really long speech about where we are in the process, but we're going to do things a little bit differently this evening. A couple really quick logistical notes before we get started. We are recording the event, so if you don't want to take furious, copious notes, you could always rewatch this event at your leisure later on this week. We will hopefully send out the recording tomorrow. We will also share a copy of the presentation, so no need to take pictures of the slides and things of that nature. We will make sure you get the presentation as well. If you have questions over the course of our evening together, you could feel free to chat with my colleague, Samantha Schreiber, in the chat. We have a lot of material to get through over the course of the evening. So unless something is really unclear, we need to get through our presentation. Note that we email you every week. Hopefully each of you received a weekly junior message from your counselor today. If you ever have specific questions about anything we talked about, just always feel free to email or call your individual counselor. You could even craft an email while you're sitting here this evening. We do not want to keep you all night. We also have a really incredible guest speaker who's going to delve into a lot of details about the process. So you're going to get a lot of information over the course of the next hour or so. A quick recognition. I want to recognize Eric Feldman, who was not at our junior parent night in September. Eric Feldman is a new member of our team. He is the coordinator for the College Counseling and Academic Planning Office. Your students have all gotten to know Eric already as they've come in and made appointments with all of us over the past couple months. They will get to know Eric really well over the next couple years. Eric joins us with a background in college admission, and he's already been a phenomenal addition to our team. We are really looking forward to having him meet all of you. To that point, we'll be talking about family meetings a little bit later. You could all expect to hear from Eric over the next couple of weeks as he interacts with each of you as we plan your family meetings. So Eric is here on the Zoom right now, and you will hear from him in the next couple of weeks as we move on to the family meeting part of our process. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge a transition happening in our office and happening in the next week. Many of you have gotten to know Jessica Jackson over the last couple of years. Your students have gotten to know her over the last several months. For those of you who work with Jessica, you know that Jessica is going to be leaving Los Angeles in the next few weeks, and her last day at Milken is on Friday. I know I speak for my entire college counseling and academic planning team in thanking Jessica so much for your tireless contributions to our office and to our school, the impact you've had on all of your students, even the students you've only just begun to know that are represented here by their families today. You will leave a great impact on our team and our office and our school. We cannot thank you enough for your contributions to the Milken community. And we wish you so much luck in your next endeavor in Boston. So thank you for everything, Jess. I also want to take a minute to make a really special introduction of Sarah Rosenbloom. Sarah Rosenbloom is a current Milken faculty member, and as of next Tuesday, Sarah will be joining our office as our newest college counselor and academic planner. Sarah got to meet with all of her new juniors today that she is going to be working with after Miss Jackson leaves. Jessica and Sarah have spent considerable time over the last couple of weeks kind of articulating and transitioning the students that Sarah will be working with. Sarah brings a wealth of college admission and college counseling experience with her to Milken. We really could not have been more lucky to have Sarah join our team and to take over from Jessica in a really important time for our students and your students. So Sarah, we are thrilled to have you with us in our office, and I'm happy to turn it over to you if you want to say any comments.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and to see all of you. I look forward to getting to work with our new cohort, my new cohort of 11th grade students. Some I have had the chance and pleasure to teach in positive psychology. This morning I was in class with them and Jessica on Zoom, and over 10 of them I had in the positive psychology classroom, and I'm just so excited to get to know them even better and get to know the rest of the cohort through this one-on-one college counseling work, and to have your partnership as the parents on the journey. I've loved being part of the Milken community for the last year and a half, and greatly looking forward to transitioning to this new role, and have enjoyed sitting in on lots of meetings already in the last week, and just looking forward to the process with all of you. It's an exciting journey and grateful to be part of it.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome to our team. And Jess, again, thank you so much for everything. One last introduction before I turn it over to Jess for our special guest. I want to introduce Bo Lindsay, who all of our junior parents should know and love. Bo is our 11th and 12th grade division head. Bo is an incredible partner for our team in everything that we do. And I just wanted to introduce Bo and let him share a couple words before we kick off tonight.
Thank you so much, Ross. One of the parts of my job that I love in working with this age group is getting to partner with our college counseling team and guiding our juniors and seniors through this transition, and just watching the care and skill this team brings to it. I think you're all starting to appreciate that, or maybe if you had older children, you got to appreciate that. And in particular, Ross and I were talking about getting a little bit of time for me just to really extend just so much gratitude to Jessica for her work with our students over these last 4 years. It's definitely bittersweet as a school to see Jessica go. And for someone who started on the college side, it's incredible how well she understands high school students and guides them through the process of getting ready for college. It's also bittersweet, I feel, Jessica, like after 4 years, you're graduating with our seniors this year, and you are going to be massively missed. Your collaborative skill, the deep care you show for our students, and the guidance you bring to them is going to be deeply missed. So thank you so much, and we're going to miss you so much at Milken. Please come back and visit every time you're in California. And Sarah Rosenbloom, so excited that you'll be stepping into this role, as bittersweet it is to lose Jessica. We're very excited to have you in this office. I remember a year and a half ago when we interviewed, I wanted to spend a lot of time talking around college counseling, because I think the perspective you bring of positive education and college counseling is going to be awesome to see come to fruition in this office. So thank you so much and welcome. And Jessica, again, thank you for everything you've done for our students, and we wish you the best.
Thank you, Bo. Okay, so I mentioned how we have a jam-packed event, perhaps nothing more important and influential and beneficial for us to hear tonight than from our guest speaker. So Laura Stratton is the Director of Admission at Scripps College in Claremont, California. Laura has been at Scripps since 2007, serving as their director since 2009. Previously, Laura worked in admission at other Southern California schools, University of Redlands and Concordia University in Irvine. Laura has a BA from the University of Redlands and a master's in education from UCLA. Outside of work, Laura enjoys listening to political podcasts, camping with her husband and her boys, and using her Peloton. So Laura, we are thrilled to have you here. As always, you bring such wisdom to our conversations, and I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to lead us in a Q&A with you.
Thanks, Ross. I really appreciate the welcome. And I'm so impressed that so many of you are here in the midst of the national championship football game. So way to have your priorities straight, but I will give a score update at any point if anyone wants one.
Yeah, that's actually a question on the panel for you. So yeah, thank you so much, Laura, for being here and bringing your expertise to our parents. Also, I will say it's so nice to see so many parents' faces. Like, I think this is the first parent night in a while where I actually see so many parents. And so thanks for keeping your camera on if you're comfortable doing that. It just makes it feel like we're actually all here together. So Definitely glad to have Laura here with us. All right, so I will jump into things. Laura, just a kind of a question to kick things off. As the experienced admission professional that you are, what are some trends that you're seeing that could affect 11th grade students as they move through the admission process in the next year and a half?
Thanks, Jess, for that. I think it's a good place to start, is just really elevating the conversation as much as we can into what are some of the things that we all are noticing or have been noticing for a number of years that have just maybe shifted and changed, particularly with COVID. So I think the first one is just the trend, especially in the last number of years, of just how many schools, not every school, but how many schools have become increasingly selective. And probably many of the schools that are on your radars already, parents, or your students' radar, and that schools that, like Scripps, which is a member of the Claremont Colleges, back when I was applying to college in the 90s, was admitting about 75% of their applicants. And now that number is about between 25 and 30%. And so it's just a fundamental shift that I think I don't start with that to alarm people, but instead I do think that it allows for a framing of the conversation, just as we're talking about, and as you all continue to talk about building lists with students and having realistic expectations and having a variety of schools, just that the landscape has shifted in how much more selective many schools have become. The other things that have just been happening, I think, are much more current, particularly in the past few years. So obviously, we in the past have loved to do this program in person and are just continually reminded of the effects that COVID is having on the college admission process and also just on students' development in general. But I think there are some things that are really interesting that maybe aren't being picked up by the news that we're seeing that are real benefits. And so the first is just that COVID really pushed the conversation forward about schools becoming test optional. And what that means is that students don't need to submit SAT or ACT scores as part of their college application. You saw with the University of California, they're not even accepting test scores anymore. And so if we can take one thing off your students' lists of things that they need to be stressed out about, I'm always in favor of that. And I think as long as testing was on the table or was required, as much as we told families or told students particularly, it's not the most important thing you're going to send, it still sent a message that there was this one test that was going to have such an impact. And as we've seen, just the test optional movement, really grow, particularly in the last few years, I think that's a good thing. The other thing that's actually a benefit for you all as families and for your students is just by the time your students are applying to college, they're going to be the third year of us seeing students with COVID-related stuff in their application. And so, it's not like everyone could be traveling and doing internships and even, maybe even playing sports at a time when there was so much restriction, particularly in Los Angeles County. And so I think that, last year we were just kind of trying to figure that out. This year, we're more comfortable in putting those things into context and just knowing that when we're reading applications, we're never dinging a student for not doing something that they didn't have access to do, right? So students are so concerned of like, well, there's going to be this hole in my extracurricular activities. I'm like, yeah, mine too, right? Like I stopped being able to have extracurricular activities as well in COVID. And so just to know they're not the first class or even the second class of students where we're having to put that into context. And instead we see it. And the other thing I noticed last year, and we're seeing it again this year too, is that when students couldn't just like laundry list all the things that they do with their time, right? Like their extracurricular activities or, I did this particular service project, they really had to reflect more on who they are. And the applications and the essays and things were actually many times better than what we had seen in the past, because there was just a very different level of self-reflection. So I don't want to silver lining everything tonight, because I know that's not the moment that we're in, but I do think it's important to know that we have seen some things come out of COVID that were not just all doom and gloom in the world of college admission.
Great, thank you. So, our families are here tonight because they want to know how to set up their student for success and there's no better way to spend your Monday evening than being here. So what high level principle do you suggest in guiding them to really think about how to best set up their student for success?
I mean, I think it's as much as possible for parents and family members and caregivers to really place this process appropriately within the whole life that your student is living at this time, right? Like we know, like we're asking students to go through a very young adult process, and their brains and experiences are not totally there, right? Part of them getting there is doing this process. But you all are adults and have that ability, I think, to constantly remind your students that yes, college is important, right? And they need to do things like meet deadlines and proofread and do those things, but it shouldn't be something that is so constantly centered in their life, because then the stress just continues to ratchet up, step by step by step, and also does not really allow for them to have those moments of enjoying the parts of school that have come back and are coming back for them. And so I think that it's just putting the process in its proper place. And you all as parents are so lucky to have college counselors at Milken to sort of explain that to you, right? And remind you and to guide all of you, because I think that it's a really important relationship with the college counseling team. And I will just be honest, like you all have some of the very best college counselors there are in this team. And I think it's just being in partnership with them. And if you're not sure if you're spending too much time talking to your student about it, or are you like nagging them too much or not enough, like you have people who you can talk to about that. And I think that it's really important just to continue to have those conversations. So I think that those are the things. And when that process is put in its proper place, that makes your students more emotionally prepared to go to college and be successful, right? And not to be sort of skidding in so burned out that they're not maybe totally ready for all the pressures academically and socially that are just going to come with one of the biggest life transitions that we know that students will have.
Yeah, it's so difficult to really focus on the thing that should be focusing on, which is the student in this, when there's just so much information and just so much outside noise. Do you have advice around how to navigate that, and also just always how to come back to like the center, true north of centering the student in this process?
Yeah, and that is the real challenge, right? And in COVID, we've just seen that ramp up in some ways that are great. Like I remember before COVID, we would talk about social media, right, in our admission office and be like, what would we even post on Instagram? I distinctly remember having that conversation in a meeting, and now I'm like, we post probably 20 things a week, right? And so I think, we're one little school. And so just knowing that there is a glut of information out there, and how to differentiate good information, I think can be one of the real challenges. I do think, it's pretty common for families to start to talk a lot, for parents to start to talk, and caregivers to start to speak a lot among themselves. And I'll get phone calls and emails, particularly from parents pretty regularly, that say, well, I heard from someone that this, right? Like you really do want them to take the SAT. And I'm like, who is this person who has this insight or not? Oh, well, it's just someone I know, right? I would highly recommend not relying on someone you know, unless it is your college counselors, right, who are on this call, or someone who works in an admission office. And you should ask us the tough questions. You should be pushing us and asking us about what the culture is like on our campus, and statistical information about the admission process. But I would say if you can start to really think about and curate who you're getting your information from, I think that can really help to cut down on some of the noise. I also think that too, you all as parents and caregivers and family members know your students better probably than almost anyone. And some of that is just the principle of knowing your own student and knowing that they aren't just going to get into college, they're going to have to go there and live there and study there. And so if it's pushing for a name, or it's pushing for an experience that you want for them, which I totally get, because we are just entering the world of club soccer, and my God, I have so many feelings about it myself, and I'm constantly having to pull back. So I think it's just constantly reminding your own, your own family team with your college counselors of just what is really going to be best for your student, and to give them the best set of experiences that they want to have.
And,
I was just also thinking about something, and I stole this from another admission person, but I love it. And so I'll act like it's my own, is as you're thinking about that and you're like, well, yeah, that's all nice and good, Laura, but like, how do I do that? Right? Like, how do I not overstep, which was always my instinct, or give them the right amount of room? And this college counseling friend said, think of yourself as a parent, a caregiver, a family member, as like you're the travel agent, because like you might actually be the travel agent having to book all these like visits and things if your student does go far away. But if you think about the role of a travel agent, right, they're like gathering information, they're presenting options, they're sort of creating the idea and an experience of what might be best for you, but they're not going on the trip, right? Like you also are not going to go to that college. And so as you're thinking about the right amount of time to be talking about this, and I have some thoughts that I can share later about that, it's also to just remembering that they're going to have to go and have that experience, and you're going to have your own experience, right? As a family with a child away in college. The last thing that I'll say, and I know that I mentioned this before, but I really would encourage you to rely on your college counselors at Milken. One of the things that I miss the absolute most right now is not being able to see Jess and Ross and Shelly and Sam and Sarah in the future at conferences, right? Because we not only are sort of catching up socially and getting to know what's going on at your schools or sharing what we're doing at our schools, but it's also just this opportunity and time for us to talk about what's happening in the world of college. And so you have this team that is keyed in and clued in to what's happening in a very different way than even like an independent educational consultant or someone else, just by virtue of the relationship that we as people who work at colleges have with folks who work directly at schools. And so I would just strongly encourage you to lean on them and to listen to them as much as you can.
Thanks. I love your analogy about the travel agent. It's like, I'm sure every travel agent also has their own preferences, and like maybe they're the biggest fan of Hawaii, but like if the student or the family, whoever's going on the trip, wants snow, like Hawaii, despite their biases, like it's not going to be the right match. So they have to check those at the door when they do their job. So I think that's perfect for parents in some ways as well.
Well, and it's also, I mean, like, not to like belabor this point, but it's like, yeah, I may say I want to go to Hawaii, but I have like the budget to go not to Hawaii, right? So the travel agent is going to know 10 other great places that are going to be more in line with what I really say that I want, and maybe surprise me. And I think that's the other thing too, is if you all as families can be open to the element of surprise. We hear that all the time at Scripps. I never thought I would go to a women's college. And I'm like, right, you and everyone else, which is fine. And a women's college isn't right for everyone, but for the right people to be surprised by that and to be, I think to end up somewhere that they hadn't expected can be a really fulfilling thing for us working in admission, but also in the conversations that I know we all have with you all working in college counseling.
Totally. Yeah, I never expected to be living in California, and I also never expected to move in the middle of the year. Surprises have a weird way of taking you in life.
Exactly.
So as a director of admission at a highly selective college, shifting gears to the application process, what advice can you share regarding like what works and what does not work, and thinking about how to craft the application and what goes into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the keeping in mind like the job, if you like hot tip, if you want, or hot take, if you want to know like what is my job, what is the job of all the people who work for me, it is for us to admit students to Scripps who will be academically successful and contribute to our community. And the academically successful one is really important. And so the most important thing that any student's going to send us is their high school record. I have a terrible habit when, we used to have like parties, cocktail parties or whatever with non-college admission people, where I would ask people where they went to high school, which became less appropriate like every year, right? It was kind of cute when I was like 25, but now I'm like in my 40s and I do that. People are like, that's weird. But I have this whole catalog of high schools in my brain, right? That I visited over the years or that I've read applications from, and I can think, oh, you went to that high school. Oh, I know what the curriculum is there, what the vibe is like. And so I think some of it is just knowing, like, our job is to know your school. Your students are never going to be dinged for not taking classes that you don't offer. It's also our job to understand your unique curriculum. And your college counselors do a very good job of sharing that information with us. But the most important thing you're going to send us is that high school transcript. And so we can see if there's a good alignment with what we can offer academically. I do think 2 letters of recommendation, which you'll talk about much later down the road, are also instructive just in knowing what your student is like in the classroom. And I will say that, for your students going to Milken and being at an independent school, they do have an advantage just because of volume at many public schools. And just the way that, a lot of times public school classes are set up, it doesn't allow for the same level of intimacy of knowing your students that I think that they will enjoy in having those recommendations from teachers at Milken. And so I do think that that's something that you should feel very good about as family members, is that letter of recommendation process. And just that, in the state of California, our student to counselor ratio in public schools is 700 students for every counselor. And those aren't college counselors. That's like everything. It's social emotional counseling, it's academic advising, it's college counseling. And so just the amount of attention, I think, really does come through in the college application process and is a real advantage. And I know I mentioned this earlier, but just we expect disruption from your students during COVID, and that they don't need to worry that they're going to be the only student who wasn't able to do all of the things that they wanted to do. We are expecting that. And if it's something that they want to address, there's an opportunity to do so on the Common Application. And also students started doing like other cool stuff, right? Like crafting and writing and reading and doing things that were maybe seemed more small. But just encourage your students to talk about that stuff, because that's actually more what they're probably going to be like in college, than off doing 85 different structured activities. So, and then finally, we talked about test optional a little bit earlier, but I know that you all will continue to talk about testing and the role of testing. And there are some schools that are still requiring testing. And so just knowing who those are and knowing that you all as your students have the opportunity to apply or not apply to those schools. And so they at any point could choose to opt out of that testing. And just to know that if a school is test optional for admission and they say that, like, we really do mean it. And we don't expect it as part of the application process. So those are some of the things that I've seen that have just sort of risen to the top in terms of how the application has sort of come together. And we are getting ready to start reviewing applications like now. So it's that time of year. And so we'll be diving in again to get to know students this year, which is my favorite part of the college process.
Great, thanks. I have a question that came into the chat that I think kind of impromptu, but kind of going back to this idea of the travel agent. And I think that this parent has the right idea with this question. What questions can we ask our kids to help them figure out what schools to apply to? Like, what would be the questions that the travel agent is asking that is getting the traveler or the college student thinking about what's going to be the right match? We talk about fit so much. I mean, what are the things that students can be reflecting on and parents can be posing for their students to really put the student at the center of this process and taking ownership in what's that right fit for them?
It's a great question. And I would say, and I don't mean to like punt it to you all, but like, that's the whole process you're going to have with your college counselors over the next year and a half, right? Are really those things of getting to know who the student is and what does an appropriate list look like for them. I think right now it's just having them start to reflect on like, when are they excited about learning? and not just like, oh, I like this teacher, right? Which is like a totally normal response for a high school student, but like, is it about the class? Is it about the content? And then just asking, I think, some continued questions there. And really then I think putting to them, and I struggle so much with this thing that we do in college admissions about fit, right? And we're like, oh, you just need to be a good fit at our school. And I think that first of all, students will be a good fit at a lot of different schools. I know for me, my choice came down to a small liberal arts college and a large public school. And while I think I would have had very different experiences, I still think I would have had a great experience. It just would have been different. And so I think maybe rather than the questions to ask, it's just starting to normalize for them as caregivers, as parents, that like, there are going to be a lot of unknowns throughout this process. And it's okay if they end up with a list that maybe looks different than they thought it would. And that having good options, even if they seem disparate or not super similar, that's okay too. And so those are some of the things. I think a lot of it is just more around a vibe than anything else. I think the other thing that parents can do, and this is, probably time and place specific, is to like question your students who have like a knee-jerk response to a type of school. And I actually wish my own parents would have done that with me with the women's college. Because I think my feeling in high school was like, oh my God, no, I'm never going to go to women's college. But I wish that they would have pushed me a little bit more and said, well, where do you find the most like affinity? And it was always with other girls on athletic teams in, different, organizations that I was involved in that were centered around girls' issues. And I think that maybe it would have shed some light for me about where I could have thrived, that maybe just would have been different. And so I think it's also with your students, just questioning and digging a little bit. And then also, again, keeping them open to the element of surprise.
Yeah, I love that. Surprise, open-mindedness, all
Mhm.
the things that are important in this process.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess just kind of wrapping things up, are there any last words of wisdom that you want to share with our families? I feel like I've already got new nuggets from the time we spent together, but any final words of wisdom?
I think it's important, and again, this is like that tension point of having these conversations with your student, being open and, like not having it always just be like, did you turn your stuff in on time? And have you registered for that, interview yet? But instead to allow the conversations to be more thoughtful and maybe more natural, but not to have it be like the only thing that you're talking about. Right. And so how do you as a family create some guardrails that make sense for you? And I think everyone's different, but one of the best things I ever heard was a family, they said, we limit college talk to one night a week. And that night, the student gets to pick whatever they want to eat. So they can pick like pizza or In-N-Out or their favorite, like, whatever. And so it creates already the sense of like joy, right? It's like that Pavlovian response of like, well, I'm happy because I'm eating this food. So, okay, we can talk about, college right now. So whatever that thing might be for you all, and just not have it totally consume the next year and a half of their life, because that is, I think, just, I think it's very reasonable why people do it. And I would just say, try as much as you can to avoid that, because you want to have the student in a position where they're also enjoying their end of high school, because they're never going to get to do that again. And my last final thing, and I mentioned this a little bit, is just, I'd say be somewhat wary of hiring folks outside of your college counselors. And there's a few reasons for that. I think that the first is just, you already have access to resources in this team of folks who are respected experts and, have a much more direct line to admission people than any outside consultant that you're going to hire. I will take a call from any of these college counselors any day of the week. I will never take a call from an independent counselor. That is just like the line in the sand. The other thing too is just, I think it runs the risk of you're going to start to get conflicting information, right? And so if you have a conversation with Shelley and you're like, okay, this is what we're thinking about for the essay. And your student's like, great. And then you have an essay consultant, they're like, absolutely not, don't do that. It's going to get really confusing really fast. And as much as you can, you want to lower the confusion around the process. And just to know that very rarely do these things that students obsess about at the end, interviewing, essays, those are not usually the things that move the needle on admission. It's their 4 years of high school, right? It's the co-curriculars and ways that they've spent their time outside of class. Those things that are long-standing, not just those dazzling moments that I think can get sort of shiny and big at the end. So that's my only other piece of advice is I think there are people who really do benefit from outside consultants. You know, the public high school where my kids are going to go to school, they're never going to have a college counseling conversation. I get that, but you're not in that position. You really do have good resources. And so I would just trust them and as much as you can enjoy the process, because 2 years from now, you're going to be sending them back to school, you know, after their first semester there and to enjoy that time as a family.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. This was wonderful to hear your words of wisdom, and I know that our families are really grateful for it, and they will be watching this recording for days to come. So,
well, then I won't spoil the football game because that'll just, you know, wouldn't work. So
surprises, right?
Yes, exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me and good luck with the rest of the program.
Thanks, Laura.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Laura.
Everyone else, please stay on. We do have more.
Yes, we are gonna jump into more right now. Ms. Jackson, thank you for moderating the wonderful panel of one. I'm a Schreiber. I am going to keep us going in this program once Mr. Mancuda shares his screen with us. But even though Laura already popped off, she is a person we always love putting in front of our parents because of her wisdom and expertise with the program. So I am going to jump in about where we are and also what is to come. So junior parents are the only parents to get 2 parent nights because we know this year is a really big one in terms of starting that conversation about college and gaining trust, getting to know your student, all of that. So right now, over the next 4 months, we'll continue our weekly junior class. We met with your kids today. Hopefully they made sure that you were attending tonight. And we will also bring in a guest speaker to come present to our students. Gary Clark, who is the director over at UCLA, will be introducing them to a new online portal called College Kickstart, which helps them manage expectations and uses data to really help categorize schools and make sure that they're finding balance in their list. We'll start working with them to create a list. We'll create common applications with them. The first semester of weekly class was very much a macro look at what is college. Second semester is much more what is your college process and where is going to make sense for you. We already met with them one-on-one in December. You guys should have all gotten emails home that lay out their testing plan. That testing plan might be you're not testing. That testing plan might be you've already started tutoring and here's when you're starting to, here's when you're planning to take your first official exam. So obviously that's individualized and each of you got kind of a different message home about that. We generally, in terms of standardized testing, hopefully every student as of now has taken a free mock SAT or ACT so that they can decide A, if they want to test, and B, if they're going to test, which one is a better fit. If you are thinking your kid is going to test and they haven't taken a mock exam, please contact your counselor so we can set you up with a resource for that. Standardized testing can be a part of this class's process, but it's looking more and more like it might not have to be. So many schools have said they are test optional. Many schools have not yet said anything. But as time rolls on, I think it's going to be more and more that will be optional. But as Laura said, there are schools that required tests this year and will require tests next year. So that's also something that will come up as we talk about your student's testing plan and about schools that are a good match for your student. Some students might have begun to prep already, others might not, others might have decided they're not testing. In general, keep us in the loop. If we had one conversation with your student in December and the plans have changed, just let us know in case our guidance or advice would change based on that. The next thing your students are working on right now, it's actually due Friday, is a long questionnaire. When we assigned it to them, I think it was already 8 pages of questions and it needs to be, like I say, at least 12 to 15 when they turn it back into us. It's a deep dive into their passions, their interests, who they are, what they hope for their future. It does require a lot of reflection. It should be taking them a lot of time to do. And like I said, it is due on Friday. So, feel free to check in with them and ask them about their progress and if they're on track to turn that in on time. For me, it's a document that helps me the most when I'm writing letters of recommendation, when I'm looking at trying to get a sense of who your student is, their capacity for self-reflection, their writing ability, their ability to turn things in on time. It's a really big piece of the work we do with your students throughout the rest of their process. The other thing we're going to do, so we're going to go over that with them in their January or February one-on-one meeting. They've already booked those meetings with us. So we're going to go over that questionnaire. So we're not just going to read it. We're going to talk to them about it. We'll also be looking over their course recommendations and putting in their course requests for senior year. So today in class, we went over that process with them. They should know exactly what they need to do to come to that meeting prepared to request their classes for senior year. Dr. Schwartz is going to send out detailed instructions about academic planning this week, but we went over with them what the grad requirements are that they need to be thinking about, looking at balance, how to push themselves, and the other rigors of senior year. So it's not just about their classes they're requesting, it's about all of the other things that go into being a teenager and being a senior. And all of those are things that they need to weigh. But again, we have those conversations with them. We do send home a follow-up email, and you'll be able to see that in my Milken. Another thing is talking to them about faculty that they've built relationships with. We started talking about this with them in 9th grade, but we've continued through 10th and 11th to be thoughtful about their teachers and how they show who they are as students and as learners and as community members. At the end of the year, they're going to ask 2 teachers to write letters of recommendation with them. We'll talk about this with them one-on-one. We'll talk about it in a family meeting. We will walk them through the entire process in class, but we are trying to make sure that they're being thoughtful about the effort they're putting in, especially since we've been back in person, and making sure teachers have more to say than they show up and they do their work. We will also have an initial conversation with them about college characteristics. So what are the different ways to talk about a college or a university? What are the things that they know they want in a school? What are the things that they know they don't want in the school, and everything in between? We actually already had them fill out a list about that, but we talked to them more in depth about it in that one-on-one meeting. And from there, the follow-up email that we send home after the meeting will have a list of colleges for them to consider. So one part of the list, this is what the list looks like. One part of the list will have colleges that are already on their radar, that they know they want to research or they know they're familiar with, and that's awesome. And the next part of the list will be schools that we think they should research. Depending on what the guidelines are for what they're looking for it could be anywhere from like 10 to 20 schools that we put on there. It's really difficult to find a school that has every characteristic your student is looking for, but every school on that list that we put on there is there for a reason. Whether it has the one big thing they're looking for, whether we think it would be a great fit based on what they're saying, even if it's not a place or a state they've ever been to or heard of. Our hope is that as partners in this process, when you guys see this list, you don't have any knee-jerk negative reactions to any of the schools on the list. This is the big part of having an open mind, is looking at a name and saying, okay, I don't know what this is, or I think I know what this is and I think I don't like it, and trusting that us as counselors are trying to serve your student and trying to serve you, and put it on there because we think there's something that they might really resonate with, and at least putting in the work to start researching those schools. So you can look at it, and if you have nothing nice to say, just say, okay, start researching. I encourage my students to take notes as they start researching these schools. So that is the next step after they receive that list home, is to start looking into all of them. I said, whether you're a like physical journal, if you are an Excel person, if you're a Word doc person, start writing start writing down the things that you like or dislike about a school. If a student comes to me and says, I didn't like these two schools, and they can give me really thoughtful reasons as to why, showing they did their work, I fully respect that. That is the whole point of this assignment, is for them to be doing that legwork on their own instead of just taking things at face value. But also, I hope that they'll be pleasantly surprised by some of the schools on that list. They should also research it using more than just one source. So not just the school website, not just, people they know that went there, not just one, vlog of a student that goes there. There are a lot of resources that we talk to them about, whether it's guidebooks, SCORE, which has a lot of great information, and they have access to search tools. A lot of the schools have their own blogs, their own vlogs. So it's all about using multiple reliable resources and being a conscious consumer of everything that a place is putting out to figure out if you're interested in the place. This doesn't mean that you are 100% going to go if you're admitted. At this point, it means, yeah, I'd really like to learn more. I think this is a place I could be happy. And that's that. So we are not expecting kids to come away from this with, a top choice or anything like that. We want them to come away with it from a list of places that they think they'd like to learn more about, where they think they could be happy. And, that's really, and places where you would be happy sending them. So that is really what we hope for. We also, when we send the list home, we take into consideration a range of viability. Viability meaning, how likely is the student to be admitted? And is it a fit in terms of it's not too far away, if that's a limitation, it's financially viable. So they have to be willing to go also. So a school that admits a majority of their students is pretty useless if the student wouldn't go there. So we're really looking for that match. If your student gives us a list of schools they're interested in that are all highly selective institutions, the list that we send will probably have more viable and target schools because they've already taken care of the reach schools, and we want them to have balance. We want to make sure that come April of their senior year, they have options and they can decide where they want to enroll, and that it wasn't decided for them because they applied to too many selective places. Even for schools that admit a majority of their students, that also means that your student is putting effort into the application, is potentially demonstrating interest, if that's a thing the school looks for, if they're applying in an early round, and that they're putting, again, their best effort into the application. So nothing is a slam dunk. Everything requires effort. And our job is to make sure that their list offers options, and also is going to be something that they feel really good about come April, instead of being beaten down by the process. All right, from there, I am going to send it to Mr. Mancuda to talk about the family meeting.
Thanks, Sam. So pretty obvious at this point, a lot of the work that we're doing is directly with your kids, one-on-one, building the relationships that we value so much and helping them kind of begin their search process. One of my favorite parts of the entire suite of work that we do are these family meetings that we will take part in later on this spring. These family meetings are where we really bring everybody together to have an open dialogue about the process that your kids are about to go through. So when our one-on-one meetings conclude mid to late February, we will begin holding family meetings. The bulk of them will take place in March. April is pretty much a month we are out of school, and we will finish up family meetings in May. The only rules we have about these meetings, they must take place before junior year ends. We definitely want to make sure that we meet with every single family and put everybody on a right path getting into the summer. These meetings must take place during a student's free period. All the meetings that your students have with us need to happen during their free period. They cannot miss class for these meetings. If your students don't have a free period, these meetings can take place after school. One thing that should make scheduling these meetings a little bit easier this spring is that the meetings will be held virtually. We will be with our juniors in our offices, and parents and any other family member that should be in the meeting will be joining us remotely. So hopefully that will make scheduling a little bit easier. One of the reasons we introduced Mr. Feldman earlier this evening was for you to put a face to a name. Eric will be contacting families in the coming weeks to begin scheduling these meetings. He will be contacting families and letting you know when your sons and daughters have free periods, and then working with you and partners, siblings, spouses, whoever needs to be in the meeting to coordinate a time that works for your schedule, your children's schedule, and the counselor's schedule. This is really when we unpack the application process. We started finding in the last couple of years that a great way to prepare for these meetings is to send home a roughly 20-minute video that takes care of explaining the college application process timeline and the application components for every school that your kids will be applying to. So you could expect prior to your family meeting to get a link to a video that the 4 counselors will create over the coming weeks that you could watch in advance of our meeting. We could certainly answer questions about those videos during the meeting, but the main focus of the meeting itself will be diving into each individual student's list, adding colleges, moving colleges around in terms of their viability for admission, going over some of those application components, talking about teacher recommendations, our summer writing workshops, next steps, so on and so forth. So again, these meetings will probably start in very late February or March and go for the rest of the semester. They will be with each student, their family, and the individual college counselor that that student works with. And there is a very important piece of homework that parents have before this meeting can take place. And Ms. Jackson is going to talk about that right now.
All right, thanks. So Ms. Schreiber had mentioned the junior questionnaire, the second junior questionnaire that your students are hopefully pouring their hearts and souls into and submitting that by Friday. I've told especially my students, they're about to have a new college counselor. And while Ms. Rosenbloom has been totally briefed on all my students and gotten all my notes about them and gone through a thorough articulation process, whether they're working with Ms. Rosenbloom or any of the college counselors, that questionnaire is crucial. And similarly for you all, there is something called the parent narrative, which is crucial in you being able to have a voice for your counselor to know a little bit more about your student. Some of you, I mean, so many of you, I've worked with your students in the past, and many of you are repeat families. So thanks for continuing to come to our parent nights. And you probably already know what the parent narrative is all about, and you hopefully remember even filling it out. But I always like to think about if you could write a recommendation letter for your student to go to college and send it to all the colleges they're applying to, which you cannot, that's not allowed. And we would never encourage you to do that, but you can send that to us. And we would love to know what would be in your recommendation letter for your student. So I always say with students and parents in these family meetings that while I think really highly of your students, obviously you as parents think even more highly of your students, or at least I hope so. So while they're in a positive light with us, this parent narrative really helps shed the full picture and the most positive light. The narrative asks questions from little nuanced things about like adjectives to describe your kid to anecdotes that you believe kind of represent your student in terms of their strengths or things that they know, that things that you know they're going to need extra assistance with in the college application process. Your insight is really helpful in us getting to know your students. And I think especially for the students that I work with and that Ms. Rosenbloom is going to be working with, while I have, knowledge of your families, and for some of you that I've worked with before, this is your, your first introduction with Ms. Rosenbloom in this capacity. And so being able to help her and any of your college counselors understand what is important aspects of your family dynamic and your students' role within your family, and potentially any limitations or expectations that you have for your students in their college counseling process, the more information that you can give us, the better. I think that the more transparent you can be with us is really going to allow us to be able to fully counsel your students. I think, you know, in especially the last couple of years, we've continued to add questions as we think about, wow, with this pandemic happening, I wonder, like, how has that changed the life of the student and their family? Have there been major shifts in terms of employment in your household, or roles and kind of duties and things that your students have taken on in the household? In terms of finances, financial feasibility is a huge part of the process, and a college is not going to be the right fit for your family if it's not financially feasible as well. It has to be the right financial fit. So being honest with yourself, with your student, with your counselor in terms of what is the transparent financial situation, that is definitely going to be the more information you can provide, the more helpful it's going to be in terms of your counselor being able to assist you in suggesting certain colleges that will be the right match for your family, financially or otherwise. So the deadline for this is submitting it by the time you have your family meeting. So you have plenty of months to do this, and we're going to be posting it on My Milk and soon and sending it in an email at some point this week. And we just really appreciate you taking the time to be thoughtful and thorough and to give us anecdotes of your students so we can see them in the most positive light possible, which is in your eyes. And certainly in terms of finances, there will be more information about that too, but any transparency and information you're able to provide with us just allows us to be able to do our job better. So thank you in advance for filling those out. And I think that is it for me. I'm going to hand it to Ms. Kierman.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Good evening. I want to talk about what it means to have a balanced college list. And I want to give you a sense of the timeline and sort of where this fits into the context of the application process, just so we can pull back for a second and see the big picture. You should think of the spring that we're about to enter as like the heart of the college research process. So this is the phase of the process where we expect students to be engaged in researching schools and learning about colleges and casting a wide net of options. And then the goal will be that when we return in the fall, when they're seniors, that the list of schools that they're looking at is going to be narrowed down. They're going to have done more research by then. They'll have visited schools and done all the things to help them figure it out, to have a sense of where they're going to apply to college. So the final college list that they're actually going to be applying to is due in October of senior year. So just to give you that perspective of our timeline here, they have until, basically September, October to figure out where they're applying to school. And by then they'll submit to us their final college list. It ranges from about, on average, Milton kids tend to apply to about 10 schools, give or take. We have kids who apply to fewer schools. We have kids who apply to larger schools. We will certainly send their transcript anywhere that they want to apply, and we'll support them in that. But we also know that the more schools kids apply to, the less amount of time they can spend on every application and on every essay. So we really don't want kids throwing away applications and applying for no thought at all and just because, and for reasons that might be a little bit more frivolous. We really want it to be a thoughtful process. We really find that kids who are really thoughtful and who do the good research and who utilize all of these tools have a really good sense of how to articulate why they're applying to every school on their list. And if we meet with the kid and part of their final list due to us in the fall is going to be that they have to defend their list to us. They have to explain why they're applying to all these schools and what do we need to know about their interest level and why they're interested in all of the schools they're applying to. And so for them to be able to articulate that means they have to have done research. And so we really expect this spring for them to dig time into their schedule. They have to start crafting more time into their life to dedicate to the college research process, because it's going to mean, like it's been mentioned before, but reading, different college guidebooks and getting different perspectives, going to different college local receptions, visiting colleges that are going to come visit Milton's campus, either virtually or in person, college tours on college campuses, which you're going to hear more about, attending college fairs, which will give you some information about a couple opportunities that will come up in the spring. Every single college offers virtual tours and virtual information sessions. So there is no lack of understanding colleges, especially in this COVID landscape. This is one huge benefit, as Laura was mentioning, the amount of resources they're putting towards virtual programming. So you can learn about any school on the East Coast without ever traveling there. And that's a really, really important and useful tool for our students. We can connect them with Milton alumni, and then SCORE and College Kickstart, which is going to be a new database that we're going to introduce to them this spring. So there's lots of ways for them to research colleges, and we have talked to our students about all of these ways, but we will continue to do that as we now present them with their first college list, as Ms. Schreiber laid out to you. And so this is the casting the wide net list, because we're going to give you like 15 or 20 or 25 schools, and that's their starting place. And we expect them to whittle that list down, to add their own schools that we didn't put on the list, to come up with the list of colleges that really interest them by fall of senior year. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide to talk a little bit about selectivity. The ideas of selectivity has been mentioned before, but we want to break it down and give you a definition of what we mean by selectivity. So we have three kind of distinct categories of how we're going to define selectivity. And we're going to start with viable or likely. So a viable or a likely school is one where the student's academic record, and we're just looking right now at the numbers, their quantitative GPA and or test scores are above the school's admitted profile. And also somewhere where the student thinks that based on the research they've done, that they would be happy and productive for 4 years. It's really important for you as parents in supporting your kids in this process to know that there is no guarantee of acceptance anywhere. And just because a school is deemed viable or likely does not mean it's a shoo-in, does not mean it's a guaranteed option. We do not use words in our office like safety or backup. And we really, really would encourage you not to use those words also, because we really want all of our kids to be applying to schools where they truly see themselves, where they want to go, where you and your child will be excited once they deposit to buy the sweatshirt and to be excited that that's where they're going to be. And not many people feel super excited about going to a school that feels like a safety school. We want it to be somewhere that you truly feel is going to be a good place for them. And financially viable also. So viable to us means great option. It's a great option. They're happy to go there. They're likely to get in based on their numbers. I will also say that viability depends year to year, and it changes year to year. A school that might have been viable 5 years ago, when I started in college counseling 10, 12 years ago, for example, Boston University was a viable for almost every kid. Now Boston University is a reach for pretty much every kid. So viability changes throughout the years as their own admission rates change and as their own institutional needs from the colleges change. The schools look for different things. Their class size might change. BU, as an example, also has shrunk their freshman class size over the last several years. And so when you shrink the class size or you over-enroll the previous year and too many kids came to your campus, then the next year they're going to take fewer students. And so that's going to have an impact on what ends up being, an option for those students. So viability can change. The other thing I want to say about viable and likely schools is that the viable schools are the ones where your kids are most likely going to be competitive for merit scholarship. So if applying to colleges where you want your children to have the chance to be awarded with free money merit scholarship based on their numbers, their GPAs, their test scores, their talents, who they are as an applicant. Those are going to come from the viable colleges. You're not going to get merit money from a school that is going to be more competitive than that. And I'm not talking about financial aid. I'm talking about their merit. So that's why viables are also really important. And when we have kids turn in their final college list to us, the one that's due in October, we really, really encourage them to have at least two to three viables on their list that they feel really, really good about. And schools that you also feel really good about. The next group of selectivity schools would be the 50-50s, or in College Kickstart, it's called targets. A 50-50 is kind of just what it sounds like. The student could be applying and their profile, their GPAs and test scores probably fit relatively evenly with the college. Some kids in that, if you look at a scattergram for a particular college and the student's GPA or test scores, it could be within range of that college. And some years that kid could be admitted, and some years that kid could be denied because they might fall on some sort of border for that college. So they would be competitive for admission, but the result would really depend on the applicant pool, how institutional needs are playing in the decisions of the college, and just sort of the strength of the applicant pool and the strength of their application. I want to also stress that having GPAs and test scores don't just get you into this process. Your essays have to also be really strong. Their essays for every college, which are called supplemental essays, have to be incredibly strong and tailored very specifically and written and researched for every single college, which is also really why it's important to do college research, because they have to explain that to colleges why they're applying. Letters of recommendation all need to line up. And so sometimes we're in a situation where a kid might say, well, I had the GPA and I had the test scores, but we saw them rush through their application and we saw them submit things that they didn't really put our eyes through it, and we didn't have a chance to help them with their essays. And so that can certainly, change where a school is going to land for that kid. And then a reach or unlikely is based on colleges that inherently have competitive admission standards. And any college in the country or the world that has an admit rate under 25%, we as college counselors are going to deem that as a reach for pretty much any kid applying. So almost any student applying for Milken to a college that has an admit rate under 20%, we're going to say that that's going to be considered a reach for you. And it's not because you're not competitive to get in. Those kinds of kids are going to be, there are going to be kids who are really competitive to get into those schools. But when you're looking at the numbers of those colleges and the spaces available and how many kids are applying who are also super competitive, they can't admit everybody. And that's why their admit rate is so low. They're turning away probably hundreds, if not thousands of students who 100% could go there and do the work and be successful and are academically strong enough and have done, a million things to put themselves in the best positions. But at the end of the day, colleges have to make decisions. And so that's why we have to have balance. And so a student's academic record that is also inherently below the admission of the school, if a school's average GPA is 4.2 and the kid applying has a 3.8, well, then that student's record is going to be below the admission profile for that school. And so automatically we would categorize that as a reach school. And so it's important for you to understand how we come up with those categories. Because we've been doing this for so long, we have a really good sense of where our kids fit in every year in these different ranges. This is not a science. And we, do our best to guide students through this process, but it's also to help them understand, to help them maximize their potential, because that is our goal, is to help them maximize this process and to have a balance so that they feel good about any of the schools they're getting into. You feel good about any of the schools they're getting into. we hope that as part of the process that's been mentioned, that as students are talking to you and doing their research, that you are being honest with them about limitations that you might have as a family. If the student cannot leave the state, or if you want them to be at a public school, or if finances are going to have a significant role, or if you want to just apply to a lot of schools that are going to be more viable to try to see what kind of merit scholarships they can be awarded. It's important for you to have conversations about expectations with your students. At the same time, I really want to reiterate the messaging that Laura shared about having an open mind, being willing to give your students the benefit of the doubt in this process, and consider things that you haven't heard of before, learn about colleges you haven't heard of before. And I think by you showing your kids that you're open to learning about new colleges and wanting to know, like, oh, what is that college that Ms. Schreiber put on your list? We've never heard of this before. Looking into it and questioning those things and learning about them would be great leadership and a really great influence for them to know that it's okay for them to learn things new too. And so we really want our kids to have this wide range when it comes to their final college list. And so that's what they'll be working on this spring. The next thing I'm going to show you has to do with different kinds of schools that our kids apply to. And what we want to highlight for you is that we have a list of very common colleges that Milken students apply to every year. If you're looking for example, like was given here, a large public school, Division I sports, really spirited with Jewish life, Michigan, Wisconsin, UCLA, Berkeley, UC Santa Barbara, Colorado, Indiana, Arizona, Oregon are on many, many college lists for Milken kids, which is great. And we totally support all of those schools. We, at the same time, also want them and you to know that, awesome, if this is what you're looking for, if you want to have a spirited school and you want to go to football games and you want to be somewhere where there's really strong Jewish life and you want to have that raw, big public school experience, you can absolutely apply to these schools. And or we want you to also know there are so many other public schools in this country that share these qualities and share these characteristics that might have that might be a little less selective, so it could be easier to get into, and might have fewer Milken kids applying. And applying among 50 Milken kids to a school like Michigan, which is already super selective, is inevitably just going to be hard. But applying to the Ohio State University in Cleveland is going to give you, in Columbus, is going to give you an example of a school where you're going to be in a city and you're going to have a super, super strong Jewish life, and you're going to have extremely strong sports, and you're going to have this big, raw, spirited experience. And we might send 1, 2, or 3 apps from Milken. And so you might stand out more. And so that's just something that we want our kids to consider. They don't all have to apply to the same places. We're going to happy to support them and send their transcript, but we want to make sure that they're also looking at places where we think they could be happy. And so we're always going to give you alternatives to also consider. And this is for their education as well as yours. On the next slide, this is an example of schools that have urban campuses. So if your student thinks they might want to be somewhere in the middle of a city, like Boston University, George Washington University, New York University, University of Pennsylvania, this is a list of other colleges that also fit within the framework of a very, very urban area, where they can be at a mostly medium-sized college and be somewhere that has access to a city in the middle of a city, and have that urban environment that they might be looking for beyond the few that might automatically come to mind when kids say, I want to be in the middle of a city. Okay, so let's also think about where else that could be. And then the last example I'm going to show you is so looking at extremely selective schools, if your student is looking at schools like Emory or Stanford or Northwestern, Penn, WashU, the list of schools mentioned here is not to list other schools that are easier to get into in any way. It's to say, okay, if you think you might want the academic rigor and the type of academic institution that any of these 5-6 schools provides, we want to also make sure you're looking at Carnegie Mellon, or you're looking at Tufts, or you've looked at Rochester, or you've looked at Rice, because they're going to have academic programs that might align with the interests that you found at some of these other places. Not instead of or one's better than the other, but because we're trying to educate them. We're trying to open their mind. We're trying to open your mind. And we want you to have a really good sense of what's available in the whole country before they really start narrowing it down. I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Mancuda.
Thank you, Ms. Kierman. And Shelley and I are going to try our best, 13 minutes to get through the rest. I would love to have you guys finished by 8 o'clock. Thank you guys for your patience. So the next couple slides are some more examples of what Shelley was talking about, of casting that wide net and giving you other things to consider. So we know we have a lot of students that are interested in engineering and architecture and STEM related fields. So again, if your kid is in that world, in that bubble, you should not be surprised to see some of the schools you see listed here. We have many students who have went from Milken to study architecture at Cal Poly Pomona, and STEM fields at Boulder, and architecture at Oregon, and so forth. So again, kind of expanding your minds to places you may not have heard about as much. We've spoken a lot this evening about being really open to your transparency about where you might want your students to go in terms of the region of the country. So as you can imagine, a lot of our students are attracted to schools in California, and we send ample applications to Santa Barbara and UCLA and USC and UC San Diego and so forth. And these are incredible institutions, but oftentimes we will have upwards of half of our senior class apply to those schools. So if we hear from you or hear from a student that you are prioritizing in-state options, again, another example of other schools in the state, some very close like LMU and Northridge, that could serve as great opportunities for your children. Laura represented the Claremont colleges earlier today. Jessica and Sam have both worked at Claremont colleges. These are incredible institutions 90 minutes away from Milken that provide really, really unique academic programs. Chapman is a very popular school for Milken students. So again, we're going to want to make sure that you and your children have open minds to all of the different options they have right here in the state of California. And last but not least, and again, Laura kind of touched on this, the liberal arts and science colleges. You know, Scripps represents one of those where Laura works. And I want to quickly point out what these colleges can and do provide for their students. These are generally small and intimate educations, most similar to what your kids are getting at Milken. So your kids who really thrive in the Milken environment, with great relationships with their faculty, with access to their faculty, with access to their administrators like Mr. Lindsay, with access to their counselors like myself and my colleagues. These are the institutions, not the large public institutions, that are most likely to provide them a similar experience. A lot of families and students are concerned about the academic offerings at these institutions. These are liberal arts and sciences college. Let the name not fool you. There are science majors at every one of these institutions. And last but not least, we know we have a lot of students who are interested in studying other STEM fields and or business fields. Many of these smaller institutions also will have incredible business programs. So as we get to know your kids, which we hope to do a lot over the next several months, if we figure out, if we're able to appreciate that they really would thrive in this sort of environment, do not be surprised if we push some of these schools on the list to make sure your kids are familiar with these opportunities. We had a couple questions come into the chat about college visits. I want to spend a minute and talk about college visits with you all now. So it's been made clear from Laura, and Shelley also pointed it out, there has never been a better time to learn about colleges and universities on their websites. Colleges have spent tens of thousands of dollars investing in virtual tours of their campuses, in virtual information sessions. I got one question in the chat earlier about visiting colleges before or after the application process. And there's really not a perfect answer to that question. We will all admit that visiting colleges costs money. So if you want to be careful with your resources, we totally understand the benefits of waiting to see where your kids get in before traveling across the country to see college campuses. My colleagues and I are always saying to our students and to our families, we cannot encourage you enough to start doing college visits right here in Southern California. If you and your kids want to get a sense of whether or not they are attracted to a large public institution versus a medium-sized institution versus a smaller college, they can do that within 90 minutes of home. They can go to CUC campuses and Cal State campuses to appreciate a larger environment. They can see schools like Chapman and LMU to see more medium-sized institutions, and they could go to schools like the Claremonts or Occidental to see smaller schools. Not to mention visiting a school like USC, which would give them a sense of a medium-sized school right in the middle of the city. So if you are concerned about resources or want to start small, we would certainly encourage starting college tours locally. The benefits of a college tour are that you get to meet students on the campus, in the environment, and see how they interact with one another. There is truly nothing like being on a college campus and getting that sense of feel and look. Are your kids comfortable on that campus? One of the benefits of having me work with all the different college counselors and in the college counseling office is combined to my work with our alumni network. So if any of your kids are ever visiting a campus across the country and you want to find out if we have alumni there, they can ask their counselors. I'm happy to put counselors and alumni in touch with your students. So when they visit certain campuses across the country, they can have those one-on-one experiences with a student who matriculated from Los Angeles and from Milken, and they could really talk about that experience. Getting on schools' mailing lists is really important. We've been talking about that with your students for weeks now as they start researching schools and deciding where they have interest. It is really important for them to get on email lists. That means they're going to be getting information when it comes out from the different schools. So if a student's really interested in engineering and they sign up for the Boulder email list, if something happens in the engineering field at Boulder, your kids will be among the first to know. Another benefit about being on mailing lists is that it is a way for colleges to track interest. At more and more schools, demonstrated interest means less and less. That is absolutely the reality nationwide. Public schools like the UCs and the Cal States do not consider demonstrated interest at all, as I could say for almost every public school in the country. And the majority of private schools also do not care about demonstrated interest. But to a point that I believe Shelley made earlier, the more your kids know about the schools they are going to be applying to, inherently, the better their applications and their supplemental essays will be. So even if the schools are not tracking interest based on visiting a college tour, signing up for an online event, your kids' knowledge about an institution will show itself in their interest in their writing. We will tell you from an anecdotal perspective, when students come back as seniors and they have done zero research, their lists are generally completely jumbled all over the place, and they have a much harder time being able to articulate and answer their supplemental essay questions. So as much research as they can do now, whether it's online or on college campuses, the better. Sam earlier talked about our spring semester classes. We will spend an entire class in the coming months talking about college visits, how to schedule them, questions to ask on them, tips of the trade, and things of that nature. We are always happy to help you build a college tour map of what schools might make sense over the next several months. And to finish it off, I'm going to turn it back over to Shelley, who's going to talk about some of our premier events coming up in the next few months.
So a couple of events for you to know about and to make sure that your calendars are marked. And of course, we'll give you more information as they get closer. But you should know that on February 15th, we will have a virtual event, 6:30 on Zoom, Financial Aid Workshop Part 1. We partner with Oakwood School and Marymount School to host this event. And we bring in a financial aid vice president from a local college who will lead parents. This is an event typically for parents or caregivers who are paying for college to understand about the merit and need process of this entire financial aid part of the application process, which is a pretty hefty part of the process if it's something that you are going to be applying for. You should know that part 2 of our workshops are in the fall of senior year. So part 1 will be in February, part 2 will follow up in October next year when your child is almost on the verge of applying for college. And that program will be just about the FAFSA, which is the federal free application for federal student aid that you'll need to fill out if your child is applying for financial aid. And so we will have an expert walk you through how to fill out that application. So please make sure that you go to our financial aid workshops. The 5 of us, we are here to help you and guide you. We are not financial aid experts. And so we are always going to ask you to rely on financial aid offices and colleges for that kind of very specific information. Virtual parent case studies event. So on April 26th at 6:30 p.m., we will have an event just for our parents where we will bring in college admission officers and give you an opportunity to learn about the college application process firsthand. You will read college applications in advance of the event to prepare for it. You'll see what a common application looks like. And as a committee, as a group, we will discuss 3 or 4 different student applications to a college and talk about what to look for, what college reps might be paying attention to, read their essays, read their letters of recommendation, compare their high school transcripts. And as a group, you will decide who you might want to admit, deny, and waitlist to this mock college that we are going to introduce to you. It's a really helpful way to have parents gain insight into this process and to hear directly from college admission reps as well. And we'll have a lot more information coming about that, so save the date for that. And then lastly, we just want to mention that we really ask you to plan your summer around our summer college writing workshop dates. So far, we know that we offer this program 2 times, identical programs. Kids will pick either June or August, depending on whatever is going to fit better in their schedule. Know that the August date will always be after the last day of camp ends locally. So whenever Ramah Elanine ends, like our date will start after that. So it's typically the 3rd week of August. We just don't have the exact date yet, but that will be coming soon. And our summer college writing workshop program is meant to prepare our rising seniors for the writing portion of the application, where they all have to submit a personal statement. And so this workshop, we will bring in college admission reps who will share with them insights and how to approach this and how to write this. They will work in a small group of 5 to 7 kids with a teacher or with one of us counselors. They will get a lot of feedback from their teacher, from their counselor. And we also bring back college admission reps at the end of the week, and they will have 2 one-on-one 15-20 minute meetings with a college rep. The rep will read their essay draft and give them feedback. And so the whole goal is by the end of this process, they will walk into senior year with a solid draft of a college essay. And it might not be done and completed, but I'm telling you that having that draft done at our workshops will save your child in senior year, will really help their process. they will be ahead of their peers if they don't do this. So, I mean, if they do this. So we have seen kids who don't do our workshop, and honestly, like, it's really frustrating sometimes because we've offered these 2 incredible programs and we really, really want our kids to take advantage of them. Otherwise, we just see that it gets kids behind if they don't. So as soon as we have the August dates, you can certainly plan around that, but please assume that your child, if they're applying to college, will hopefully join us for one of those events.
Thank you, Shelley. A couple quick points, and then we are totally finished. Shelley talked a lot about the Parent Case Studies program happening in late April. Rest assured, we are doing a program for your students as well. That will happen during class, during our college counseling weekly class. Registration for the June and August workshops will be available in the next couple months. As Shelley mentioned, you could expect the August date will be in mid-August when local camps are over. And generally, we allow enrollment at either program. We generally try not to cap either program so that students can choose the one that works best for them. An email will go out hopefully tomorrow from our team to all of you with the slides and with the recording. And I cannot stress enough, I answered a bunch of questions in the chat during the course of the evening. I'm not sure if Sam was as well, but if you do have questions for us lingering from tonight, you get an email from us every week. Do not hesitate to reach out with specific questions about your family, about your child, that we might be able to help you with. But with that, thank you again, Mr. Lindsay, for joining us. Thank you, Ms. Rosenbloom, for joining us. And we're excited to have you join us officially next week. And from Jess, Sam, and Shelley and myself, Happy New Year, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you all.